Serenbe is a place where people live, work, learn, and play in celebration of life's beauty. And we're here to share the stories that connect residents and guests to each other and to nature. This is Serenbe Stories. In today's interview, our very good friend, comedian and podcaster Pete Dominick talks poignantly about big life changes and finding his way after losing his dream job. We recorded this conversation last fall, and he graciously agreed to chat with us again this April to talk further now that the world is going through its big life changes and we're all trying to find our way. We hope you'll find comfort, common ground, and definitely a chuckle or two with Pete. So stick around for parts 1 and 2 of today's episode. But first, Serenbe Stories is brought to you by the Inn at Serenbe. The Inn is nestled in the rolling countryside of bucolic Serenbe, where guests can walk on the 15 miles of trails through preserved forest land, the wildflower meadow, and the animal village. You can relax by the pool, hot tub, or in rocking chairs on the wraparound porch. Play on the croquet lawn, swings, and in-ground trampolines. Connect with nature and each other, all while staying in luxurious rooms on the inn grounds or within the community of Serenbe. Book your stay today at serenbeinn.com. Welcome back to Serenbe Stories. We're here today with Steve Nygren again.
Hey, Monica.
And our very, very good friend, Pete Dominick.
Monica and Steve, it's like I'm back with my family.
It's so good to see your smiling face and hear your voice on the streets of Serenbe again.
It is so good to be here with both of you guys and with this whole community. I have so many amazing memories with my family here, and I'm in transition mode in my life. And so being here is automatically inspiring and idea creating and relaxing because it just is the cure for stress.
It is a cure for stress.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, Pete Dominick has been on SiriusXM for the past 12 years.
Yeah.
You may know him from Stand Up with Pete Dominick. We know Steve from the Children in Nature Network, which is Richard Louve's nonprofit foundation. And I think that's kind of where our story begins, right?
Yeah. I got connected with the Children of Nature Network and found out about their work. And I said, I really want to be involved. I don't know what I can do with or for you. And they said, we have an idea. We have a conference coming up. How would you like to host it? Because, of course, I'm a host. I moderate conversations. I host events, and I would love to host an event for an organization doing the type of work that I care the most about, which is connecting children to nature and working on saving our environment. And so I went to Vancouver for the first time, and I hosted the few day long event. And that's where I met this white haired, beautiful man, Steve Nygren, who came up to me in his bow tie, I think, right? And said,
Probably.
and introduced himself. And he told me about this place. Mm-hmm. And I didn't quite buy it.
Really?
You know, the way he described it, I was like, there's a place like that? And he has a great pitch, of course. And so then I went back to my hotel room that night and then saw him again. He talked to me about it again. You really should bring your whole family down. And I said, okay, all right, sir. Thank you. I'm really excited to hear more about it. I went home.
Okay.
Left Vancouver, went back home to New York. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting in my office studio at home. And I was like, let me just look this guy up and look this Serenbe place up. And I went to the website and I said, oh my goodness, this is really an amazing, original, inspiring looking place. And then Steve told me that my kids would love it. I said, I don't know if my kids would love it. I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. And I looked a little bit deeper in the website and I said, you know what? I bet they would. And then he invited me down to be an artist in residence where we stayed here for the week. I broadcast my show. And at the end of the week, I did a stand-up comedy show. Mm-hmm. A whole bunch of my listeners came out, and it was a transformative experience for me, my wife, and our girls. And they were here for an hour before they fell in love with it. They were here for an hour before they were jumping on trampolines and picking food off plants. And that was it. We were fully in.
Yeah, I've forgotten that you did the show the first year, and you did made some good jokes about Serenbe. I think our residents appreciated that. And the second year, what did we do? Did we do a dinner with you?
We did a dinner. I did my show from here. We made some videos, and I toured the farm, I think, which is really, really great. I learned a lot there because I'm an amateur gardener.
Yeah, you did a great, with our previous farmer, Matt, you did a funny video that we'll put up on the website.
Yep, tried to steal a tractor.
Yes.
Did not get very far.
And a chicken, I think, maybe.
I did steal a chicken, and I was chased down by a rooster. And it was great. It was awesome. That was, so I've been here. This is my third time, but I'd been here twice with my family. So this is the first time I'm here without my wife and daughters. And so it's different. It's hard because I had so many happy memories with them here that it seems wrong or weird to be here without them.
But you have a really good reason for being here right now. Well, a couple of really good reasons. Do you want to tell us about Richard Louv?
Well, if you need to be told about him, I'm kind of happy to unwrap that present for you in a way, because I remember when I first discovered his work and his book, Last Child in the Woods, which was really a transformative read for me. I read it while I was away with my wife and daughters in Sicily, where my wife's family is. And it was also a transition in my life at that time with work. And I was reading this book knowing I was going to be interviewing Rich, but I'd never talked to him. I'm just, one of the great privileges with working in media is you get to read a book or watch a documentary and then interview the author or the film director. And cool. So I was reading the book knowing I'd be interviewing him and not knowing how much it was going to transform me as a person, especially as a parent. And so that was years ago now, maybe 7 years ago, where I first read Last Child in the Woods. I interviewed him, and that began a relationship where I kind of pursued him for friendship. I applied for friendship, for mentorship, and then, of course, led me to Steve and led me to Children of Nature, and now came down here just to be with Steve and Rich for his newest book. And he's done it again. He's written another amazing, inspiring book about our connection with animals, and I hope that everybody will get it. And I'm really excited to be in his presence and Steve's, and just there's people. I've always tried to surround myself with people who are better and smarter than me. I think everybody should do that. I've always tried to surround myself with mentors, people who can teach me, who I can suck all of their essence dry and use what works for me and leave what else is behind. And that's what it's like being with Steve Nygren and being with Rich Louv, and Monica being with you. I mean, you are a force. You are a person who connects people in a way like very few people I've ever met, because it's a delicate dance and you dance it so perfectly. And you put people in connection with each other that can build and feed and work with each other in a way I don't know that I could ever do that. I don't know that I could pick people and put them together in that way. And that's part of what you do, and it's part of what this community does, because it also is a really great connection for people. And Steve, I always forget that. I think so much about nature, but so much of what you did here was to put people in touch with people. Where I live, in my community in the suburbs of New York, we don't talk. We don't talk with each other. We don't wave. We don't say hello. You come down here to Serenbe, you're walking down the sidewalk and somebody waves to you and you're like, hey, easy. Okay? What? I don't know you. Why are you waving to me? Or you're like, do I know that guy? Geez, I feel bad. I didn't know that guy. Does he know me? But it's you don't have to know each other. It's just human beings.
Connecting.
Why do that?
You do that. You do that over the air.
Sure. Right.
We do that on the streets.
Right. Well said. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No. And actually, as I was thinking about this, so you want to talk just briefly about sort of, you're talking about transition that you're in right now. You've left SiriusXM about 30 days ago.
Yeah.
And so that is where I found you. I had listened. I had my minivan and I drove it back and forth wherever I was going. And I still am sort of a political junkie, and sort of came in through whatever the channel was on and found you.
Yeah, the POTUS channel.
The POTUS channel, which I think was like President of the United States, Politics of the United States.
Politics of the United States for the people of the United States.
Okay,
catchy acronym.
So I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I fell in love with you. I felt that you were unpacking, unlocking things, explaining things, bringing people on that were really interesting. I was learning. It gave me a sense of maybe control to have a better understanding of certain things that were outside the typical media ecosystem or atmosphere. And so I would love to hear just a little bit about, I know you've left, but you were kicking off a podcast again. And
you've been
doing
Sirius XM was awesome to me. And it was a 12-year experience. And live radio does so much to bring a community of people together. And this was a community of listeners who were from all walks of life, affluent, middle class, lower income. And they did all kinds of different jobs. And this radio show connected them. That's live radio and podcasting can do. And it was a group of people who were curious, who were passionate, who wanted to fight apathy, who wanted to learn. And for me, hosting that show was like going to college every day and cramming for a final, learning about the issues, preparing for the interviews, talking to these people. And every day was like a classroom where I was just the host. I was never the teacher. I mean, I always impart my own opinion on things, but I'm no expert in anything. And I always thought, well, if you're going to host a radio, if you're going to have a platform like this, you should be responsible with it. And you should bring on people who actually know what they're talking about. Yeah. And so many people don't do that, especially men. They want to be the know-it-all behind the mic. And I'm the right one and you're wrong. And my brain is on loan from God. I'm the great one and all that BS, which nobody is. It doesn't matter who you are. To listen to one person for hours, you're not going to learn much. It's only going to become some kind of a cult. And so I would bring on a wide array of guests, and we would talk about everything from parenting to politics to economics to human connections, you name it. We discussed important issues that mattered to people in their lives, in their community, in their country, and on our planet. And leaving Sirius created a challenge in terms of what I was going to do next with an audio medium. And obviously this is the time of podcasting. And so I have created a podcast that's in many ways similar. It's different because it's a different medium. It's not live. You're not taking callers and so on, although that I may transition back into that somehow. And it's called Stand Up with Pete Dominick, the podcast. And it's the same thing. I get to interview inspiring, thought-provoking people and ask them questions about important issues. And obviously we have no shortage of those in this time that we're in. And we're in a very, and you touched on this, Monica, when you were talking about the old show, but we're in a very confusing time. And the confusion can create anxiety and feelings of being overwhelmed by everything that's happening. And it's happening seemingly so quickly. And so I'm trying to slow that down and explain to people what is happening and what you need to understand, what the solutions to these problems are, and maybe how you can be a part of it. But if you're not going to be a part of it, at least understand it and not allow it to consume your life, because we have enough with our own families and our own careers than to deal with the president, announcing that we're going to buy Greenland.
Right.
Which, by the way,
would be a really great purchase.
Would be a really interesting purchase. Yeah. Serenbe, Greenland.
Just wait.
And if that were the only announcement that concerned us,
right,
then that would be just fine.
Exactly. One of the things that I did is I went in, I follow you on Twitter. And one of the things that I was seeing that you posted yesterday, which was really interesting, and that I just want to touch on because I think it sort of speaks to everything that we've been talking about over the past couple of days. It says, you posted, does it seem like everything is overwhelming or is it just me? Hashtag Thursday thoughts.
Yeah.
And you got so much engagement.
Is that right?
Oh yeah. More. I was looking at all your other tweets in comparison.
And
no one cared. And this one got tons of engagement. And then I started reading the which you should go and do, but you might start crying. People are seeking connection. They are seeking an answer, and they are feeling the same way. And one of the things that is kind of a fun thing that they'll say is one guy says, or a woman, I don't know.
Oh, wow. There is a lot of engagement
I know, right?
on this.
Not having you on in the morning really sucks, right? And so you got a lot of that, but you also got a lot of I'm tired of feeling on edge. I'm tired of the anxiety. I'm tired of feeling overwhelmed. And, so many things are going well, but so much in the media is sort of pushing us back down. And to your point, trying to divide us.
There's one, I'm looking at it now, and there is one response, and I know this guy personally really well, and he happens to be a psychologist. Dr. Herb Harmon responded to that tweet, which again was, does it seem like everything is overwhelming or is it just me? And what he writes in his response, and I think this kind of encompasses what you're saying and basically what a lot of people may have resonated with, is the machines are taking over. Too much information. Our brains aren't meant for this. So there's too much I think what he's saying, and I don't know where the data is on it, but there's too much information. There's too much coming at you digitally on that screen. Mm-hmm. And so if you had a fight with your spouse, or your kid is struggling in school, or you've got financial issues, or your parents, my dad just had a heart attack. These are all real life, actual things that you're struggling with. Then you go to your screen and you light up Twitter or any kind of news thing, and you see a flood of things that are happening. And the problem is, this has always been life. I mean, imagine on December 7th, 1941, mm-hmm. if you had seen the attack on Pearl Harbor playing out on Twitter, and then you had everything else going on in your own life, and then you learned, by the way, all of the other things that were happening in the world. Right now, you're seeing revolution, people in the streets all over, in Iraq, in Chile, and of course in Hong Kong, and you're connected to that. And then you see the president tweeting things every day. And then you see all kinds of other things, a natural disaster, the wildfires, you're dealing with, climate change, all of those things on top of your own family's issues. It's too much. Mm-hmm. And so I'm realizing this kind of unintentionally, that when I lost my gig at SiriusXM, it meant I didn't have to have this constant drip of news in my veins. And instantly I was less stressed. And so while I've tried to fight apathy for years, maybe we need to think less about the day-to-day ongoings of impeachment or of any other news story that's unfolding, and more about the longer-term issues in the world, and pick a few, mm-hmm. or the shorter-term issues in your life. Disconnect, take time each day, be in nature. That these machines are taking over, and they're taking over our children as well, and they're creating stress and anxiety in our kids that we did not have, and mm-hmm. we don't know how to parent because we don't relate to it. Mm-hmm. So you have to disconnect from these machines, and you have to get back to the way that human beings are supposed to be. I think I'm no evolutionary biologist, I suppose it would be the field of study, but we are supposed to be connected with other species and with our ecosystem, not with machines. Yeah. I don't think that's a radical thing to say. That being said, we are connected to machines. That's life. But ration it. Mm-hmm. There are trade-offs. Take the news out of your vein.
Yeah. I mean, the big difference, I think, is look at what you have effect on. I call it my own backyard, whatever it is, as where you can affect change. Why do we spend the time worrying about those things we could do nothing about? And so it can be passing information if it's going to affect your life, but why do we focus on something that's happening somewhere else?
It's absolutely an integral piece of advice, Steve. And it's, doing that show for 12 years, I talked about the most divisive thing. We talked about guns and racism and religion and things that people are really divided over, and sexism and gender and all of those things. And after the 12 years, I think the effect that I had the most in terms of the thing that I talked about and maybe preached a bit was to abandon single-use plastic. We talked about racism. We talked about sexism. Those things resonated. Those things mattered to people. But the one thing that I think most people took away was, one of the things I don't use, I don't buy plastic bottles of water and bags anymore. And by the way, it doesn't mean we have to be pure, but limiting our relationship with single-use plastic was something that I was very focused on and continue to be focused on. And it's, for me, one of those things, as you say, where can you create change? And I was just on the biggest podcast in America, and he had bottles of water, Joe Rogan's podcast, and he had these bottles of water everywhere. And I realized I've been advocating against this. Now here I am. I forgot my thermos, and I won't do that again, because here I am on TV, on YouTube, holding a plastic bottle of water, which is, like Rudy Giuliani holding a crucifix. They don't go together. Like a vampire with garlic, me in a plastic bottle. And so, by the way, did you know Rudy Giuliani can't go out in sunlight?
Yep. No.
Yeah, his skin begins to burn.
Wow.
So he's a vampire. So if he wants to, though, he just turns into a bat and flies out the window. The point is, I'm sitting there being sacrilegious, doing something that here I am with this plastic bottle of water. But what I did was, instead of being a hypocrite, I said, Joe, on the biggest show in the world, why don't you just get a big water dispenser and have a mug that's sponsored as your name on it. And if you don't want to make money off of it, then use the money and help fight plastic. You have the Serenbe mugs here. And so he said, hey, why don't we? Not a bad idea. And if that's the thing that I did on that show, despite any of the other issues, and we talked about everything, then great. And now he's got all these people watching and they're more aware of it, because you can't get mad at people for not being aware of a thing, but you can fight that ignorance and apathy and make that point. And so maybe that's what I picked. Maybe that's the issue I picked, single-use plastic and trying to end its existence in our lives.
Well, and all the other issues. I mean, when you have an audience like you do on air, you can touch one person.
That's for sure.
Maybe that one person you don't even know about that stepped forward and decided that's going to change my life.
When the
just
show,
like Rich changed yours.
For sure. So many people have had that effect on my life, but those people had that effect on other people's lives because people are listening to our conversation. And when the show ended, it was devastating for people. I'm still hearing from people even a month later, and they talk to me. People I never heard of. I thought I knew everybody that was listening. They'd contact me at one point on social media, or they'd emailed me. And all of a sudden I'm hearing from a lot of mostly men saying, you changed the man I am. In terms of the father and husband I am, by the way, that you talked about your own shortcomings and how you were getting better. But I had role models. Frankly, Barack Obama was the president while I was raising my daughters and he was raising his daughters. I watched the way that he raised his daughters, and I watched the way that he treated his wife. And then Steve, you with your daughters, like I watch men and how they are with their daughters, and I try to take that on the air. And so many men reached out to me and said, I became a better husband while you became a better husband. I became a better father while you became a better father. And to have that effect on one person, as you said, that's all anybody could ever, my cup is filled, but hundreds or thousands of men reaching out and saying that. I mean, every day I cry when I read those emails. Every day I cry. And I say, I hope you'll come to the Stand Up with Pete Dominick podcast. But if you don't, fine. Because we created something, we grew together.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I'm seeing in conversation we're having, and as we're having people on the podcast and just even living here, is trying to find that common ground. And so whether that is we can all agree on we shouldn't have single-use plastics, or we should all agree that nature's a good thing and we should either get out in it or protect it. Yeah. Finding those things that aren't as divisive, and finding the people that we don't agree with on maybe these very polarizing topics that we can all agree that we want to protect the trees or the fish.
The main problem in America and with humanity, and probably always has been, is tribalism. And you're on that team and I'm on this team, and I have to win. I have to beat you. And oh, by the way, the worst amongst us take joy watching someone lose. And I'm not interested in that anymore. And so I like to talk about how my wife and I disagree on so many things, and that we can't even agree right now on a TV show to watch together. And sometimes we can't agree on what to have for dinner, because that's real. Because that's two people. That's any two people anywhere. And so fine, you put that aside, you find out where you do agree, and you work on those, and you spend the time on those issues with no matter who it is. It's your parents, it's your wife, it's your coworkers. Where can we find unity and work on compromising? And we've gotten to a point where our media has us so divided to get ratings, by the way. I mean, that's what it's about, to sell advertising to make money, because it works, that we have lost this idea that we are all in this human experience together. We're on this journey together. Let's find ways to compromise. And Steve always, I've never seen him get really too upset about something that somebody believes. Yeah. And I want to be more like you. I want to be less reactionary and more understanding of people who I disagree with. And I'm working on that. It's hard. It's hard for me because I get easily offended and outraged by injustice and bullies. And I want to solve all of it and save the world. But it's increments and it's little pieces, and it's not really helpful when I react negatively and get upset and worked up and start yelling. So the other day when I cut a guy off in traffic and he came over and started yelling at me, I blew him a kiss. And then we went out and had dinner, and we've been together since.
I always think...
Shout out to Rusty.
I always think that it takes a lot of sandpaper for a good finish. And so when I see those difficult people come forward
a little
with ideas,
right there.
I think, hey, that's softening my edges maybe a little bit if I just can understand where they're coming from. The other thing is, I had a friend who was a young psychologist, Brew Joy. And he was always good at saying you have to look at both sides. Everyone wants to only look at the happy side, the good side, what's going to make us all in. He says it's a balanced world, or we would tip over the side.
I have a way to go ahead. You were still going.
And so he said, when you're just appalled by someone, maybe it's a rapist, maybe it's someone who is doing awful things. He said, possibly think that there's roles that have to be taken. And instead of being so angry at that person, maybe have gratitude that they have filled that space so that you didn't have to.
Well, that's a very interesting way of looking at it. I mean, I have, I interviewed a murderer once, convicted murderer, and he taught me so much. But the main thing he taught me was how he came to murdering another person. You're not born as a rapist or a murderer. These are things that are learned. And so my way to approach often that type of person is what was that person's journey? How did they arrive there? How did I arrive where I arrived? And really trying to understand that as opposed to just judge the conclusion of where they ended up. And, I don't know that everybody can find redemption, but given the right opportunity and resources, most of us can. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not going to judge you on your worst behavior or choice. And I think too often that we really do that.
We do.
Mm-hmm. But
because we don't look in each other's eyes or in each other's souls.
Well, I could look in your eyes for the rest of my life, Steve Nygren. They're so gorgeous. I'm diving right deep in. We don't. And it's hard to do that. And it's intimidating to do that, I suppose. But, you said earlier, we all want to have this, put on this brave face that things are going well. And that's what social media is. Instagram and Facebook, especially, where you put up a picture of your family on vacation, which I'm known to do shirtless. And because I really am in great shape at 43 and people should know, and I need the likes and the approval and all of that. But that's you at your best. Here I am on vacation, which you get, maybe once, if you're really lucky, if you're really, really lucky, more than that a year. Maybe your life is a vacation, who knows? But Instagram, I always say Instagram and Facebook isn't who you are. Mm-mm. If you really want to know who someone is, check their internet history. That's who someone is. They're looking up all their hypochondriac concerns. That's where their gossip is. That's where their real person is. But I wanted to ask you, Steve Nygren, and you too, Monica, for this. I'll put you on the spot.
Okay.
You both have been huge influences on my life as human beings. You've both connected me to both experiences and community, and mainly other people. And you've also done that for my family, which I will get emotional, but forever be in your debt. And I hope that the idea is to just pay that forward. But who is it in your life, a person in your life, that did that for you, Steve? Who is someone that introduced you to an experience and other people, or, provided you with some piece of wisdom that you took and rode away with? Well,
there's certainly people through every phase of life.
Sure, yeah.
I remember as a graduating senior from high school, and I was headed to the University of Colorado, and we have been farm families for generations on the plains of Colorado, and that can trap you. And my uncle, who was a professional sax player, could have had a huge opportunity in the big bands of the 40s, and he didn't. And he looked at me and he said, "Don't let this trap you. Get out of here." And knowing the disappointment that both my grandmother, who could have been had an opportunity to go to the Metropolitan Opera and always regretted it, and I knew his regrets, and they were both there in their lives, that they were very happy children, everything. And so from that, I left. And so that was a huge advice.
If we had time, you can probably fill a book with each phase of your life where people,
And then he goes on, Vernon Stouffer is he was determining what to do with Stouffer's Food Corporation and selling it.
Oh, that Stouffer?
Yes.
I love their French bread pizzas.
Yeah, well, I ended up in the home office at Stouffer's. I worked for Stouffer's, and Mr. Stouffer and I were the first in the office there in Cleveland, Ohio, in the home office, and they're just down the hall, and he sort of took me under the wing and shared stories with me, and also I think he saw I was this person that he could sort of think aloud about what was going on, and saying
all you guys did was sit there and trash the Swansons. How do we beat the Swansons?
How do we do that?
The TV dinner. Why didn't we think of that?
And so, those are all, and through each phase of life, there's been, really important people. And now through this whole journey with.
For me, what's interesting is, for me, what you've been, as much as you've introduced me to this community, you and I don't know if you recall this, but I've approached you a number of times and asked you about fathering to daughters. And you've given me a number of times pieces of sage wisdom that seem so simple, but I've met all of your daughters and they're such wonderful beings. And they're, more than anything to me, they're all very confident. And they have a confidence that I'm frankly not used to and slightly intimidated by and almost surprised because of sexism in general and my own and societies. And these women are so, I want to say well adjusted, but confidence is what I get from them. And I sit there and go, well, how do I instill that in my daughters? How much of that was your parenting, your guidance, or putting them in the right places? So to me, that's something that I've really wasn't expecting to get from you, but was happy to have stolen.
That's great.
I didn't get to you, Monica. Now I've turned the tables on the interview. I'm sorry, but
it's okay.
You can't say Steve because, of course, we know Steve has had a huge influence. And who is the person,
big influence,
maybe that had an influence or changed the trajectory of your life? If that's not too dramatic.
No, and I don't. The first person I think of is my husband, and that may seem like
go ahead
cliche or something, but Jeff has. So we've been together for almost 20 years now, and so he has always pushed me. And I think he pushes me to uncomfortable places, and he himself, so I'm an extrovert, if you hadn't noticed, and he is not. He would much rather be at home and hang out. And so he's such an intellectual. He's so smart and bright and curious. And so he is so far out on ideas and trends. And so he'll push me on whatever that is going to, he's doing. And that'll make me uncomfortable, but he makes me a better person by pushing me to sort of rethink choices that I'm making. And one particular, not story, but he was an economics major. So he taught me one time when I had a job offer, they had given me, it was like a, Silicon Valley technology job, right? And they gave me stock and they gave me money and I wanted, more of both, let's just say. But he's like, well, you need to think about, put it on an indifference curve. And I was like, well, what's an indifference curve? He's like, let me tell you about that. An indifference curve is basically you have money and you have stock options, or you have access to nature, you have access to big box stores. What's more important to you? Do you want to live right next door to Target? Or do you want to live right next door to nature, right? But then you're 10 miles from Target. And so somewhere on that curve, it's sort of like an XY, right? Somewhere on that curve, you'll find where you want. And so anything that you're trying to make a decision on, think about it as an indifference curve.
Oh, I like that. And to summarize it, I love this phrase, you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So you can't have all of everything you want on the indifference curve, and you have to realize that life is trade-offs, whether it be so many, I would imagine, relationships break up because you just can't deal with this quality of this person, and you think that you're going to be with the person who's going to have all the things you want and definitely not that quality. No. That's not necessarily true. The grass isn't always greener over here, or job or career, which is not to say don't go outside your comfort zone and be on that indifference curve. But don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, whether it be a candidate for office, a job, a spouse, a place to live, whatever it is. It's just that the perfection, maybe you would disagree or put it differently. To me, that's a fool's errand to pursue. I mean, obviously this body is perfect that I'm in, but I mean, and other things.
It's probably one of our biggest problems with our political system. We're constantly searching for the perfect candidate, and we're destroying some of them.
Well, he's got this and this and this. She's got this and that and that. But you know what? She doesn't feel the same way as I do about this thing. Well, nobody does. Neither does your spouse. Neither do your kids. Neither does anybody that you know agree with you on everything.
Well, that's a good way to sort of start to leave it. But I did want to ask you one last question. Is there anything else you want to share?
Anything else I want to share? Just how much being in this community, since it is your podcast, your story, has really changed me, and how pursuing living in a community like this is something that is an aspiration of mine, and that people should get to know this community. Not that they have to move to Serenbe and live in Serenbe, but to try to, I hope, replicate the idea that you have here. Not that every community has to be like this community, but that this is a very interesting idea that can bring people a lot of peace and joy and calmness in their lives, as it has the people that live here and other parts of this country and the rest of the world. So I would just say to people listening, if they don't know about this community, look it up. And if they do, continue to spread the word, because it's working. And I am so happy to be a part of your family in this community, and to evangelize about it and proselytize about it, because everybody I tell about it discovers it. And whether it's the place for them or just a piece of it is a place that they can take somewhere else, it's a great, great resource, and an amazing place that you have created and that you have all cultivated. And so I congratulate you and I thank you. And it's a real, real highlight of my life to know you guys and to be here. And when I'm here, I'm very, very happy. I just wish my wife and girls were here with me, and I look forward to when they are.
Even though you don't live here yet, you're definitely a part of the fiber of
it feels that way. It feels that way for sure.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Stay tuned for the second part of the episode after this message from our sponsor. There are two rubrics in building a city. You can follow the sprawl mentality, or you can preserve land while boosting economic development. Serenbe builds and designs to be both beautiful and environmentally sustainable. If you're a city planner, developer, landowner, or policymaker, there are common sense solutions you can take to build a biophilic-centered community. Attend the Nigran Placemaking Conference this fall to learn more. Details at nigranplacemaking.com. That's NYGRENPLACEMAKING.com. So, Pete, you're back.
Monica.
You're back. And Steve.
Hello.
We're recording this remotely, so but we're excited to see both of you guys, Steve and Pete, and wanted to follow up basically from last fall in our conversation that hopefully everybody just listened to. Pete, you were about 30 days out from Sirius at the time, and you had spent a couple days here with us, and things have changed. It is now early April 2020. We're in the midst of shelter in place and COVID. But you've also been recording your podcast for what? Are we at 6 months now? How many months have you been doing it?
Yeah, that sounds about right. 5 months. That's a good question. Whatever the beginning of November was when I started, just about the same time I was last at Serenbe. Mm-hmm. SiriusXM ended my contract in the beginning of October. And so, yeah, and it's been the craziest, most amazing, most challenging 5 months of my entire life for a lot of different reasons, both personal and professional. My dad's health, my daughter's health, and it's not serious, life-threatening, but scoliosis with she has to wear a back brace now. And then, of course, the pandemic and losing all of my gigs that I'd worked so hard and clawed my way out of. My wife had lost all of her clients and classes, but somehow we have figured things out, and we are, I'm not going to say thriving, because we're terrified about our financial future, but there's something very specific about this pandemic, which is the phrase one day at a time has never meant so much. And every day that you wake up, you and your close loved ones don't have a dry cough and a fever is an amazing day. And that way of thinking is the way that I hope to continue thinking after this is hopefully all over.
No, I think that's a great point. I think one of the things that you had mentioned, and I do want to hear more about sort of the podcast, but I thought I was struck by listening to our conversation from last fall is that you were saying, on your street, nobody really talked to each other. Has anything changed in your neighborhood? Are you out and about more? Are people out and about more? You live in a suburb of New York?
Yeah, just north of New York City, Rockland County, Clarkstown to be specific, Congers to be even more specific, and I'll give out my home address as well. You guys can come over. No, you can't come over because we're quarantined. Yes, it's changed. This is clearly forced people outdoors. It's forced them outside. If they have a yard, they go outside. People are absolutely taking walks. I'm seeing people live on a dead-end street, so it would make a lot of sense for people to walk up our way because, they just keep, they get stuck and wouldn't know what to do. But I'm seeing more people walk up our way that I've never seen. And sometimes they have a dog, sometimes they don't. One old lady walks a cat, which I find bizarre. But no, I'm kidding. There's no cat lady. But there are so many more people outside walking, and the park was so busy. The park that I go in every day and run or walk in, and I'm usually only see a few other people. Every day was so busy that they actually had to close it down because we're at the peak as we speak right now of our outbreak here where I live. And there were just too many people out there and congregating. But yes, the answer to your question is I'm seeing a lot more people outside, and it's a really fascinating behavioral or societal observation to witness. And you're kind of like, what took you so long?
Have you met new people that are actually neighbors or talked to someone that you only saw?
Yes. The people around the corner.
What's that been like?
It was a little bit awkward, but awesome. It's like, it's awkward because you say, how did we never speak? But awesome because at least now we're connected.
Yeah.
How do you think that relationship will be after we're back to a more normal life?
Well, I worry, Steve, once we get talking politics, it'll be over again. But, you worry, you just, I never want to upset people with anything my neighbors about, but it seems like neighbors are so private because they don't want to have problems, seemingly. And so they just don't connect. This certainly specific to my neighborhood. It wasn't like that where I was growing up and many other places I've lived. But people just really keep to themselves here for, I don't know, some bizarre reasons. I certainly wish I was at Serenbe.
So remind us how your neighborhood's set up as far as sidewalks. Does anybody have a porch? Are they sitting out in their front yard now?
Nobody sits in their front yard here, Steve, that's for sure, because they could be seen. So people do sit often, in their backyards, often which are fenced in. There aren't any sidewalks in my neighborhood. There are in a couple of blocks, if you will, or neighborhoods over some of the newer developments. But people don't really connect and stop and speak the way human beings should, the way they do there at Serenbe, the way they do at communities all over the country. And the neighborhood certainly doesn't lend itself to that. And this is where people are to drive cars only. I mean, there's really not even good public transportation where I live, which is pretty bizarre because it's so close to New York City.
Do you find that the girls are, your daughters or teenage daughters, are they out walking? Are they, how are they doing without the socializing with friends and in person?
They're doing surprisingly well. They stay up till 2 a.m. and get up at 10. Almost every night.
Yeah.
We've thrown a lot of the rules out the window in terms of the screen time, but they are absolutely getting outside every day and exercising. And we still have to push them sometimes to be outside and to walk the dog, but not as much as we did before all of this because they want to be outside. Yeah. And it's been a fairly mild spring here, very mild. And we've had some beautiful sunny days. So they've definitely spent a lot more time outside. We have a nice yard here where I live. And like I said, they closed down the parks. So that's pretty depressing. But yeah, they're getting outside more, and I think they're appreciating it more. Constantly forcing them to learn new things, or at least try. Ava helped me build a new fence for my new garden plot, which I've added because why not? And I taught her how to how to use a miter saw, circular saw that you pull down. Unfortunately, her hair got caught in the saw and she cut off her thumb. We couldn't go to the ER because of coronavirus, but I'm kidding. She did fine. It was great. She's learning.
It's those life experiences that will make her a stronger person, Pete.
Who needs that?
So, Pete, now that they've closed down the parks, where are people walking, or how has that changed the area?
Steve, that's a great question. It just happened yesterday. I only know that Val and I, my wife and I, are taking to the streets. So we're doing our runs in streets, and I might even, today I was thinking about driving to a neighborhood I've never been in and running around over there and wearing just tights, no shirt, because I don't know those people, and I thought it would be entertaining. Maybe face paint, but I don't know. It's time to explore, and I think that it's such a funny question, Steve. Sad, because when you say, what are they doing now that they're not in the park because it's closed? Well, they're probably doing what they did before the pandemic forced them all out. And hopefully you want to think that people are having experiences right now, especially outdoors or connecting with other people on different virtual chats that will sustain. Right. You hope that whatever they learn, whatever they've read, whatever new person they've talked to, whatever hobby they might have picked up because they had more free time on their hands. Some people do, some people don't, obviously. That will sustain, that they will continue that relationship, continue that walk in the woods or even just down the street. And I'm an optimist, so I believe that most people will keep a lot of these things that I'm talking about through the end of this nightmare. But I the realist in me sometimes worries, we'll just fall back into normal patterns. So I hope most people will take these new things and run with them.
Is the reason they closed the park because there wasn't enough green space for social distancing?
Yeah, the pathway is more than comfortable for people wanting to run past each other, but it's just narrow enough that there were starting to be groups of families with strollers. They would stop and they would talk. And in my community, I didn't know this, but apparently they had drones, little drones flying over the park, watching as people kind of clustered and talk, which, I don't love for privacy reasons, but for public health reasons, I think it's probably a good way of checking in. People don't know better. People's behavior is to want to stop and to talk and to connect to people. And right now, at least till April 20th, we're taping this on the 8th. So it's going to be closed for a couple more weeks. So there are other parks with more space that they haven't closed yet. So I'm certain we'll probably all head over to them and then fear that they might close them. But they're a lot bigger. They're state parks nearby. So.
Pete, tell us about the podcast. When we talked to you in the fall, I think you were doing 3 days a week? Tell us a little bit what's changed. What guests have you had on that are really interesting? And even how has that affected, the past sort of 4 to 5 weeks during COVID, how you've pivoted?
Is that what you say during COVID?
I don't know. Is that terrible?
No, it's fine. Everybody has their thing. I say during
COVID, during shelter in place, during this crisis.
All of them are fine. I just wonder if we'll ever agree upon one. I call it pandemic. What do you say, Steve? He's probably got something really wise.
No, I just simply say, the virus.
Oh, well, that's darker than COVID.
It was a little dystopian.
Well, this is the current virus, I should put, because I think there are a lot of other ones, and they're not all about health and body.
There it is.
Yeah, exactly.
So for me, what has changed, Monica, is I've taken the podcast to daily, which is what I did on the radio. I did daily on the radio, and it's a lot of work for sure. But I have more time to do it because I don't have my other responsibilities, traveling, taking care of the kids, driving them around. And number two, as we all know, everything is so focused on the COVID, the virus, the pandemic, the shelter in place. As a comedian and as a broadcaster and host of a national radio show, I've always tried to talk about things that people care about and then make things that they might not care about important to them. I've always tried to fight apathy, but both as a host of a radio show that's daily and live when it was on the radio, and now the podcast, and a comedian, you're always looking for what people are going through that's a shared experience. So yes, while I want to introduce them to issues that they're not familiar with and hopefully fight apathy and get them to care about these issues, even though they don't maybe directly affect their life, I have to talk about and like to talk about the things that we're all dealing with and the shared experiences that we're all having. And there has never been a shared experience like this one. Never. There's nothing remotely close. So my show is now, every show is seen through the lens of life during this time. And the other thing I've done is I've begun to, my show has always been a mix of talking to experts on any number of issues that we're discussing and talking with the people who are listening to the show, who also may, by the way, and are experts at something, whether they're a teacher, a scientist, or a mechanic. They know something really well, and it's always great to get experience. But what I've been doing is, because I lost my job so publicly, I'm a broadcaster, and everybody knew I lost my job, and I decided to document my anxiety and depression that went along with it and write about it and talk about it everywhere, from television to radio to podcast to an article for Katie Couric's newsletter. Because of that, so many people reached out to me and said, I've been there. So many people helped me with their experiences. So many people just supported me. And now the craziest thing is millions of people are basically having happen to them what happened to me. Millions of people are now losing their jobs, and with it, money, identity, ego, and they're dealing with anxiety they might have never dealt with. They're dealing with depression that they might have never dealt with. And oh my gosh, I just got done with a 4-month course on it. I'm here to help. So I'm no expert, but I have learned a lot from that experience right before a whole bunch of other people, many of which were like, you're going to be okay. One door closes and another opens. And all of a sudden they're like, the door closed on me. And those people that were encouraging me are now in the boat that I was in. And so I'm doing my best while I continue to struggle to try to share these coping mechanisms, learn from people, continue to learn from people, and really open myself up and the show up to anybody that wants to talk. Again, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a shrink, but I can keep a conversation going. And right now, that's something that people need, a conversation. People need to know, and I needed to know, that they're not alone. And literally, a lot of people are physically more alone than they've ever been. There's a lot of, single people living alone, and that's really hard. But I'm just putting myself out there for them. I'm calling complete strangers on the phone every day. And if they let me tape it, I'll tape it and share it. But I'm just talking to people all day. That's what I do. And I don't have all the answers. I don't have many answers, really. I just keep a conversation going. And that's what I'm doing every day in the podcast, talking to experts about all these issues and keeping a conversation going with thoughtful, hilarious, passionate, curious, generous, kind people.
Yeah, and you wrote a blog for Katie Couric's blog.
I mean, it was more of an essay, Monica, than a blog.
Yeah.
I mean, you make it
first-person essay. But I feel like that was a really pivotal, at least, I've been talking to you for months about how you're feeling, but I felt like that was really personal. You really put it out there, and I feel like that was a pivotal moment for you. And that was just before COVID, just as it was kind of coming into the lexicon. Did you find that really sort of changed how people saw you, or was that a turning point for you? Yeah.
That was scary. Mm-hmm. So what I did was, and both you and Steve, who I've gotten to know and trust completely, knew about a lot of the most personal struggles. And I had shared this with you both, I think, when you were visiting New York, if not prior to that. And the title of that post was "Losing My Job Saved My Marriage." Mm-hmm. And I wrote honestly and openly and explicitly about how my wife had really gotten to a place where she just wasn't happy with a lot of the ways I treated and talked to her, in terms specifically of, I had gotten this kind of arrogance about me that I talked to all these big deal intellectual people every day. And when I come home, I'm not sure you can join me in this kind of conversation. And what it meant, what I kind of would condescend, and I was always right about everything. And it was like, why even hear from you? I mean, I'm generalizing. It wasn't like that all the time. I wasn't a complete monster. We had a lot of happiness and so on, but it was like that far too much. And having that moment of condescension or arrogance or dismissal once a day is far too much for any relationship. And I think I was doing it fairly regularly. And losing my job humbled me in a way that nothing had, and put me in this really dark place. It was a place that my wife had visited and lived in off and on throughout her life. And so being in that dark place with no light, not knowing what to do, was the most difficult struggle of my life. And in walked Valerie with a lantern, and sorry, I get emotional. Well, that came right out of nowhere. I mean, I was partly impressed with my uses of lantern. That's partly why.
That was really nice, actually.
Yeah, it was a kerosene lantern.
I could picture.
So she just lit the way for me, man. And I have to say, and I truly believe this, I love her now more than I ever did. I loved her for so many reasons. I fell in love with her. And then she reinvented herself to me by being able to help me in a way that I never needed. And a lot of people have been so amazing in my life, including all of you guys. But Val just held my hand and she picked me up, and she wasn't mad at me for losing my job. She didn't blame me. And she just peeled me off the ground day after day and gave me specific advice and coping mechanisms and framing and perspective, and write in a gratefulness journal. And now, because I wrote in a gratefulness journal, I wrote some of these, mundane little things that you never would think to be grateful for. Now, yesterday, I was outside in my backyard and I spent about 12 minutes watching these red fox 3. I've never seen 3 in the woods play with each other and with a poor little mouse, tossing it up in the air and back. And it was the most entertaining thing and the most in the moment I'd been in probably 10 days. And I thought about it, and then I talked about it with people all day. I kept bringing it up, and I didn't realize how boring it was for them to hear about, as entertaining as it was for me to experience. I saw 3 fox today, and the one was, and it's just people are like, okay, thank you. Now, we were supposed to talk about economic policy. So
yeah.
The Gratefulness Journal was one thing that she gave me, and that essay for Katie Couric's newsletter introduced a whole bunch of complete strangers to me, and people, came out, and complete strangers reached out to me and said, I need help. And I just, again, told them I can't specifically help you, but I'll talk to you. Let's talk just about anything that you want. And I had a lot of new friends now.
Yeah. No, and I think we're all reassessing what's important. And we're all, whether that is, an individual in your life or how we spend our time. And I think we put up, I've weeded like crazy because we don't have any events. I don't have any press coming in. So my weekends are like really mine again, which has been lovely. And I've weeded our whole side yard. I mean, it's been so therapeutic, and like found like our bird feeders and put them up, and that has been, I've had my fox moment with our birds. I get very excited, and it's the little things that are really fabulous, right?
I did both those things too, by the way. I spent like an hour yesterday weeding, and I put up 2 bird feeders. But does bird feed go bad? Because my birds are snobs. This bird flies up to it and just starts looking at it and is like, nah, I'm good. I'm like, what's wrong with my feed, Steve?
So we have 2 different kinds of feed. One they won't do, and one they will. I don't know.
Kind of vegan cardinals?
Something. I don't know.
After 9/11, there was some of this same reassessment, but it lasted, 48, 72 hours. Do you think because this is much longer, because everything you've mentioned, whether it is the relationship with Val or observing 3 foxes, those are all things generally that are in front of our faces every day, and we're just taking time to reevaluate, notice, or appreciate. how I think things are going to be 6 months from now.
It's such a great question. And I think the 9/11 analogy is as close as we have. And I was living in Manhattan and I was there that day. And so that time frame that you mentioned, 48, 72 hours is not too far off. I think people learn two things from that. Helping each other and connecting with strangers and making eye contact with people, was one thing, just doing that a little bit more. But more importantly, I think people learned how precious life can be and how quickly it can end. And since 9/11, I certainly learned a lesson about that specifically. And I think about it every single day. And whenever I drop my daughters off, which has been like 4 weeks now, that we've got anywhere. But when they get out of the car, I say to them, eyes. And I want to make sure they make eye contact with me. And they're rolling their eyes at this point because they're 12 and 15. And they've been having to do that since they were, little to me. But that's because on 9/11, there were plenty of men and women who left their homes and didn't think that was the last time they were going to see their family. So I don't take that for granted. That's my 9/11, that's what the shift created in me is understanding how precious life is. I think this is different in that the loss of life is different. And in many ways, obviously, it's not a terrorist group behind it. There's not that hate there and so on, except for the divisiveness of politics and the leaders that we have. But this is a long way of answering your question, Steve. I'm sorry. I guess because I don't know. I don't know what this teaches us other than what I said earlier, maybe some new hobbies and hopefully some new friends because we're forced to connect or, you're maintaining relationships with people that you hadn't talked to in years. But I'm not sure that we're nicer to each other now. I'm not sure that we are think life is more precious now because the kind of the loss of life is a different kind of thing. But I hope, if anything, I want to hope that people will live in the moment more. Because when I lost my job, people said, and my wife said this all the time, you're so worried about next week. You're so worried about next month, next year. You have no idea what's going to happen in the next moment or tomorrow. And like I said earlier, when you wake up in the morning and you don't have a dry cough and a fever, that's an amazing day. What are you going to do with that day? I hope that if anything, people learned a sense of mindfulness and appreciativeness of the fact that they have their health in this moment. They have their health in this moment and to stay in that moment.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's perfect. And I do think that because this is going on so long and, we're not maybe even in the middle of it, we'll have more time to make those sort of adjustments or sort of change your headspace of what's important. I am hearing that from people and,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's hard to have you guys asking me questions because I ask questions and I'd rather hear your answer. So Steve, the question that you asked me, I'd love to hear what you and Monica think is the answer to your question. As you're asking it, I'm just like, I was trying to fill space. I was like, screw this. I wish he would answer it.
Well, one thing that I think about is what was the long-term really effects as you look at our government or reactions as well as individuals. And, the thing that's really happened is we focused to the point that we made sure that airplanes are no longer missiles of destruction. Huge money, huge effort if you look at the security. But we didn't look at all the other things. There are there's a handful of really crisis areas that we tend to ignore, just like we ignored this health. Imagine if we thought more globally and put some sort of temperature sensors on all those airport screenings so we could at least know if there was maybe someone entering with anything that should have better health screenings. I worry about our grid, which is very vulnerable. And imagine if that earthquake out west had been more severe and taken out part of the grid, and what it would be like to be in times like this without the power grid in effect. And what if this were a foodborne virus And we've allowed 60% of our food to be grown outside the United States. So who is going to start looking at the other really serious issues? Or are we just going to take care of this one so we're better prepared? And then something's going to come out from left field. And it's just a few, and we're tending to ignore all these threats.
Well, and I think we ignored, the greater we ignored this one, right?
Well, absolutely. You could blame the Trump administration, and certainly there's a lot of blame to be laid there, but this didn't just happen over the last 3 years in our preparedness. We think we are beyond anything affecting us. Who, a few months ago, who would have ever guessed there was anything short of an invasion from outer space that would shut down the world?
I have a way of tying my point and your point together, which is as the individual, it's great to be mindful and live in the moment. Not that you don't want to plan for the future, you do, but as much as you can be in the moment. But a government shouldn't be living in the moment. A government should be prepared for as many eventualities. We can't be ridiculous. You guys are down south. We don't want Atlanta to spend money on snow plows, because that wouldn't be efficient. You only have one ice storm every couple of years or something like that. But you do want them to be prepared for a pandemic. You do want governments at the state, local, and federal level to be prepared for all of the things that you just mentioned. But I think that people don't look at that as money well spent or whatever. People live in, by the financial quarter or the election, and that's no way to live.
But also, I think that's looking at Big Brother taking care of us. Now, you have a voice to where you can push them. Someone like me, we just have to stand by. But we can start growing our own food and not dependent on this system to do that. We can start putting energy efficient houses and move to solar. We might be able to go off the grid if something happens. So, I hope that individuals start waking up on how they're going to live if something bigger happens.
Yeah. And by the way, Steve, don't sell yourself short. I know whose numbers you have in your cell phone. I think you can.
Yeah, but they don't take them anymore. The wrong people are at the other end of those.
Oh, Nygren's calling me again.
What does he want? Well, Pete, tell me, the last thing I sort of want to touch on is how do people follow you? I know that you have your podcast now that's every day that everybody can find. Wherever fine podcasts are, you're available. But you're also doing special Patreon live conversations. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So, how do you support yourself doing a podcast or in media, in independent media? There's only two ways. There's ads and subscriptions, or both. I really don't want to have ads unless they're companies that I love, but I haven't looked for that. I've just looked for individuals supporting me. And so people, pay anywhere from $5 to, a lot of people pay $100. It's crazy, for a month. And what they get is a lot more access to me and the show. They can contribute to the show. They can have their voice on the show. And I talk to them a lot, and everybody's a producer. So everybody has ideas of who should be on as well as what should be talked about. And they themselves get to, be the callers for the show. And so we're creating something. There's 500 people in that community now, subscribers. And that's enough people, I think, to come up with an idea or set of ideas that we can all focus on and work on, some of which are inspired by my work with you guys there, of course. And so I don't know what that is, but we're crowdsourcing it, and it might be many things. I'm sure it's influenced by the COVID, the pandemic, but it could be any number of things. So it's a really cool way to do media, independent media. It's not corporate, and people know that they can get to me. They can call me out. It's transparent. It's honest. It's passionate, hopefully entertaining and informative. And that's it. Stand Up with Pete Dominick podcast.
Perfect. And also we should follow you on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle?
At Pete Dominick on the Twitter and on the Instagram. I got to do the Instagram more. And now I got to do the TikTok, I'm told. I got to do the TikTok. I thought that was for kids. Nope. They tell me I got to do the TikTok. I got to do the LinkedIn. I got to do the Bublé. Have you heard the Bublé?
No, what's Bublé?
It's Michael Bublé. I've got to do more with Michael Bublé. I don't know. I'm just making up app names. Social media. Sounds like Buble should be a social media app.
Well, and you also have, which you've kind of reignited, is your stand-up garden club on Facebook.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, if you're on Facebook, and if you're not, great. But if you are, for any insane reason, the groups are the good thing of Facebook because they're private. And if someone's a jerk, getting like, this is for people who are in the gardening. There's over 700 people, mostly in America, that are just members of this garden group, the Stand Up Garden Club Facebook group. Search Facebook groups for Stand Up Garden Club. And yeah, I didn't think because of my depression and because of I just needed to work all day, every day, that I was going to be able to garden this year. But I decided that was an important part of my life. And then now I have more time. So I expanded the garden. And so I reposted on Facebook, hey, join the garden club, and reinvigorated it. And I just basically, I have no idea what I'm doing in my garden. So I ask questions and everybody else is asking questions. So whether you've had one plant that died or you've got a whole farm, everybody's welcome to that Facebook garden club. And it's fun and people are good and there's nothing political or divisive. It's just people sharing their ideas about their gardens, what works, what doesn't.
I love it. Well, Pete, thank you so much for your time and for this follow-up.
Thank you guys very much for having me. I could do this all day.
Oh,
so good to see you. Tell Val and the girls hello and look forward to the next time you can come to Serenbe.
Thank you for listening to Serenbe Stories. New episodes are available on Mondays. Please rate and review the podcast and make sure to email your questions for Steve Nygren to stories@serenbe.com. You may even get to hear them on the podcast. More details about episodes and guests are available on our website, serenbestories.com.